Okay guys, in our last couple of videos we've been exploring complex numbers. In these next few videos we're going to be looking at operations with complex numbers. And so, just like you might suspect, if you take a real number and you add it with a real number, you get a real number. When you take a complex number and you add it to another complex number, as in what you see up here, a plus bi plus c plus di, you get also a complex number. So with respect to adding and subtracting complex numbers, I'm going to write a little hint here, but what we're really doing is combining like terms. Now I know this. When we talk about I is not a variable. It is the square root of -1. But when it comes to working with expressions that have i's, we're going to treat them like a variable in that we just combine like terms. So looking at this first expression here, it says a plus bi plus the complex number c plus di. Really what we're going to do is we're going to add the real parts of these numbers together. And so we get a new real part, and the new real part is going to be whatever we get when we add a plus c. So I'm going to call this the real part. And then I'm going to say, well, what would we get when I take bi plus di? I would get b plus d of these I things. And so this part here would be our imaginary part. And so what these definitions basically state are that we're just going to add the real parts together, get our new real part, and add the imaginary parts together and get our new imaginary part. But you notice that my answer here is in this standard form of a complex number. So when we look at subtraction, how would this be any different? I suppose that the first thing I want to do is rewrite this, because whenever I look at this as having a negative in front of parentheses, I think I want to distribute that negative throughout the parentheses. So I'm going to look at this instead as a plus bi plus, and then we're going to make everything in here their opposites, -c minus di. And if we're following the same rules as above, you can see that at the moment I switch this over to addition, it just becomes combining like terms again. So the a is going to go with the c, since they're the real part of each number, and so we get the new real part of our complex difference here. And then we have plus, in this case, -c minus d. We'd have -c. Sorry. We got to rewind a little bit here. -c minus di. We got a minus c. We're going to add the imaginary parts here. Forgive me, I was looking at the wrong spots. But we're going to take this bi and we're going to add it to -di. And so we get b plus -d of these i's. In other words, b minus d of these i's. So if you want to put it into context, what we're really doing is we're just subtracting the real parts and the imaginary parts respectively here. And so in summary, we're just going to combine like terms, and we're going to add real parts with real parts and imaginary parts with imaginary parts. So I think that it's really useful to see and practice here, but it says find the sums and differences and write your answers as complex numbers in standard form. So we're going to write all our answers in this a plus bi form. Taking a look at letter A here, you'll notice that 2 minus 5i's wrapped in parentheses, -3 minus 2i's wrapped in parentheses. I have to tell you that because this is a plus, we really don't need these parentheses. So the only purpose that they serve is to tell you that this whole real plus imaginary part on this first thing represents a single complex number, and that these two terms represent together the second complex number. But at this point, because it's plus, we'll drop our parentheses and we'll just combine like terms. So I'm not going to use this formula you see here, but I am going to follow the rule that says you add the real part plus the real part. So 2 plus -3 would give us a -1. And this is going to be representative of our new real part in our number. And when we take a -5i and add it to a -2i, we get a -7i. And so I'm going to put a box around this. And the first thing I want you to notice is that when we added a complex number to a complex number, we definitely got a complex number, and we could write it in standard form. So taking a look at a subtraction example, the rule is this: we need to switch this to being a positive first by distributing the negative throughout. So I'm going to switch this to 4 plus I in the first set of parentheses, but plus -8 plus 2i. And at this point, we could drop our parentheses, because with the sum, it just becomes combining like terms. Excuse me. So 4 plus a -8 would be a -4 as our new real part. And we have a 1i here, a positive 1i, plus a positive 2i would be a positive 3i. And again, here's our complex number in standard form. Now, every once in a while, you take several complex numbers, like this one here, this one here, this one here, and this one's technically not written in standard form. I could say 10 plus 0i, but I'll tell you, it's really not a necessity. It becomes a similar thing. We're just going to combine like terms. The only thing I would suggest is that we follow the order of operations, that is, work left to right, and at the same time, if you see any negatives in front of complex numbers, let's distribute it and rewrite this as completely as a sum. So in this case, I would have 2 minus 5i plus 8 minus 2i, but then I would have plus a negative 14 and a negative I, and this is all plus 10. At this point, we're just going to combine our like terms. And so we're going to put together all the real parts of these numbers. So 2 and 8 from left to right is 10. 10 plus a negative 14 be a negative 4, and negative 4 plus a positive 10 is a positive 6. So 6 is the real part of our complex answer. And in terms of the imaginaries, we have a negative 5 going with a negative 2 is a negative 7. Negative 7 plus a negative 1 is a negative 8. And this didn't have an imaginary part. So we would say 6 plus negative 8i, or more realistically, we would probably write 6 minus 8i. So when it comes to adding and subtracting complex numbers, what I want to make sure that you're doing is just essentially combining like terms, being extra specially careful when you have a negative in front of a set or parentheses to distribute that negative. Cheers.